7. The coming forth by night. Satanism should not just be another religion. It should be an unreligion. Michael Aquino. In the history of modern Satanism, it's interesting to note that the first and most serious schism which took place in the Church of Satan was over the issue of whether or not there was a real, Satan-like being out there somewhere to worship, or if he, or it, was just a handy symbol. The result of this schism, which took place in 1975, was the foundation of Dr. Michael Aquino's Temple of Set. Aquino is no less extraordinary than his erstwhile colleague, Levi. Sporting a black widow's peak which Grandpa Munster would have envied, and satanic eyebrows like Mr. Spock, characteristics he swears are natural, Aquino certainly looks the part of a warlock. His wife, the former Lilith Sinclair, is a cadaverously beautiful brunette with a livid white face and black satin dresses, a look-alike for Morticia of the Addams Family. Though they may look amusing, they are anything but. Unlike Levi, who is a mostly eccentric and self-taught genius, Aquino has a doctoral degree in political science and is a lieutenant colonel in Army intelligence with a very high security clearance. Comforting thought. He is said to be an expert in psychological warfare, and psychotronic warfare, what the Army calls SYOP. During the formative years of the Church of Satan, COS, Aquino was Levi's right-hand man, and Lilith Sinclair was a prominent leader of a major grotto, COS term for a local coven, on the East Coast. Aquino even wrote the foreword to Levi's Satanic Rituals book. It is not clear how much of the philosophical content of the Church of Satan teachings was influenced by Aquino, but his impact seems to have been considerable. The reasons for their falling out are in dispute. Apparently, a large part of the problem was that Aquino felt Levi was not taking Satanism seriously enough. Aquino disagreed with Levi's pragmatic atheism and also with his carnival showmanship. He seems to have thought that Levi was in it for the money, which the latter unblushingly admitted. Oddly enough, Aquino felt that a more, excuse the expression, altruistic approach was in order. Rather than create a fast food, Kentucky Fried Satanism which anyone could join if they coughed up the cash, Aquino envisioned an elite, almost paramilitary order of satanic intellectuals who really believed in the dark side, and weren't just in it for a few cheap, kinky thrills or a fast buck. In his writings, Aquino made it sound as if the torch had been passed from Levi to the more serious, intelligent, and dedicated Aquino. Levi, it was implied, had fouled the infernal nest with crass materialism and bawdy house humor. Aquino was to be the new dark messiah to Levi's John the Baptist. Levi must decrease so that Aquino and his new god, Set, could increase. For his part, Levi has been largely silent about the split, and has increasingly drawn into seclusion in recent years. The Temple of Set. From its inception in 1975, the Temple of Set reflected the desires of its founder. It has been more elitist and less publicity conscious than the Church of Satan. Thus, its membership has never numbered more than the hundreds, perhaps 1,000 at peak, while Levi's church had many thousands of members, a lot of them simply people who had sent in their money and received a membership card. Aquino preferred to drop the inflammatory name Satan. He felt the word had acquired too much negative baggage. Hence, he called their deity Set. The Temple of Set people call themselves Setians, not Satanists. He felt Set was an older, and more pure form of the satanic archetype or image. Set was an Egyptian god, 3400 BC, and was regarded as evil by later pharaohs who defaced his temples and monuments to try and eradicate his memory and cultus. Set was associated with the cults of Sumer and the star Sirius. His symbol is the inverted pentagram, which Setians wear proudly. One can tell a lot about a church by examining its god, and Set is no prize. He is the Egyptian equivalent of Cain, whom occultists believe was not Adam's son by Eve, but rather by a mythical wife of Adam, before Eve, called Lilith. According to rabbinical commentaries, not the Old Testament, Adam had a wife who was made, as he was, out of the red clay earth. This was Lilith. She, however, was not the meek, submissive little helpmeet that Adam wanted. She would not, the story goes, submit to his authority, in the marital act or anywhere else, for that matter. Thus, Adam went to God and complained, in effect asking for a divorce. Rabbinic legends say that God sided with Adam and kicked Lilith out of the Garden of Eden, hence the first divorce. God then made Eve out of Adam's rib, so she would be more compliant to him. However, as in any divorce, the problem of what to do with the kids reared up. Lilith was pregnant with Adam's child when she was expelled from the garden. Supposedly, she was so full of hatred that when the child was born, she dashed its brains on the rocks beside the banks of the Euphrates River. Depending upon which version of this legend you wish to believe, all the world's demons poured out of the dead baby's skull, and this is where demons come from. Or, Set came out of its skull. Either way, Lilith was felt to be the mother of all evil and abominations. Because of this awful act, Lilith was believed by more superstitious Jews down through the years to be the cause of crib death and child murder. In fact, in some more mystical Jewish homes, to this day, a talisman is placed over the bed invoking three angels, Sanvi, Sanzanvi, and Samengalef, to watch over the infant. Those angels are supposedly the archenemies of Lilith. Unfortunately, they are not mentioned in the Bible. Remember, the high priestess of the temple of Set, Akino's wife, changed her name to Lilith. This shows the reverence they pay this disgusting demoness. Ancient Egyptians believed Set was the god responsible for all evil, and his mom, Lilith, was the night hag who was also the patron saint of abortion, a traditional witch practice. In ancient Egypt, Set was originally worshipped with obscene, homosexual rituals, before his cult was stamped out. Aquino, however, teaches that the Christian Church established Satan as a straw man to justify their guilt for the expulsion from the Garden of Eden and their separation from the animal kingdom and rest of the universe. Set, Satan's true identity, actually represents that same sense of alienation and loneliness from the rest of the cosmos. This choice of Set as the central icon of Aquino's temple is most revealing, for the worship of Set as it has been restored today has centered around the book, Liber Alvel Legis, the Book of the Law, which was mentioned earlier. This book was revealed in 1904 to Aleister Crowley and claims to have been channeled by Crowley's first wife, Rose Kelly, from a superhuman, extraterrestrial being named Iwas who was either Set or Set's forerunner. To Megatherion. In order for some of the following material to make sense, we need to digress for a moment and expand on what has been said about Aleister Crowley's position in all of this. Crowley was born Edward Alexander Crowley in England in 1875. His father was a wealthy brewer of ales who became born again and joined the strict Select Plymouth Brethren denomination. As a result of his conversion, Crowley sold off his wicked brewery and used the assets to support his ministry. Crowley's mother was also a very strict and devout Christian, but what she had in faith, unfortunately she made up for in her lack of parenting skills. The elder Crowley traveled the countryside as a street preacher of sorts, and Mrs. Crowley was left to raise little Edward, who grew up to become the ultimate nightmare preacher's kid. He was evidently a brilliant and precocious child, and, as many children, full of the devil. Once, in a fit of temper, she told the boy who was around the age of 6 that he was so wicked he must be the great beast from the book of Revelation. Unfortunately, little Crowley took the insult, and wore it like a badge of merit. He rebelled violently against all forms of religion, and later as an adult, baptized a toad with the name Jesus Christ and then proceeded to crucify the unfortunate creature upside down. After finishing university, Crowley joined the occult/Masonic Society, the ancient and hermetic order of the Golden Dawn. It was during this time that he began to affect the dress and mannerisms of a Scottish laird and changed his name to the more Scottish-sounding Alistair. It didn't hurt that Aleister Crowley added up to 666 in Hebrew, English and Greek numerology. Crowley quickly outgrew the Golden Dawn. And they expelled him after he tried to take it over. In many ways, he was a Renaissance man. He was a passable poet, an extraordinary mountain climber and big game hunter, a master chess player who could play 8 chess games blindfolded at the same time, and a disciplined student of yoga and Eastern meditation. He attempted to climb the second highest mountain in the world, K2, and was nearly blamed for causing the death of most of the expedition. He also had a caustic and razor-like wit, a serious addiction to cocaine and heroin, and was deeply bigoted and anti-Semitic. On top of all this, he became one of the most influential occultists of the past century, and certainly the most influential Satanist. One prominent occultist has written of Crowley that he was the flower of the entire body of Western occultism and its literature. He was also probably demon-possessed to his toenails. He believed that he had done what very few occultists had done, crossed the great abyss, a spiritual black hole which exists between 7 degrees and 8 degrees in magical attainment. At that point, he supposedly became a Magister Templi, Master of the Temple, and took on the crowning magical title of his career, to Megatherion, Greek for the Great Beast. A new Eon? Crowley felt that the most important event in his life was the aforementioned contact with this superhuman intelligence named Aiwass. This occurred in 1904, when he was taking his first of several wives, Rose, through the Cairo Museum during their honeymoon. She was overpowered by some spiritual force and drew Crowley down a corridor towards an exhibit showing a particular Egyptian stele, a squarish stone slab shaped roughly like one of the Ten Commandments tables with Egyptian art and hieroglyphs on it. This was the stele of an Egyptian priest named Nkfna Khonsu, and the number of that exhibit was number 666. To someone as magically trained as Alistair was, this could only be an omen of immense proportions, since he had already made that number the Kabbalistic theme of his career. Later that week, during early April, his wife channeled this being, Aiwass. For 3 days, he dictated through her this book of the law, Liber Alvel Legis. Crowley came to believe that he was the reincarnation of this Nkfna Khonsu and that this short book he'd received was to be the Bible for a new eon of human history. He believed that the reign of Jesus, the age of Osiris, the slain and risen God, had ended and that a new God, the crowned and conquering child had assumed the throne of heaven. This new God manifested in 2 forms, Hirapar, a benign, healing-type deity, and Arehorkut, a falcon-headed god of war and death. These were the twin Egyptian deities of Horus and Set. This experience basically set the tone for the rest of Crowley's life. He tried to found a religion, which he called Thelema, after the Greek word for wool, or Crowleyanity, and produced a tremendous number of books of poetry, rituals, and magical teaching. The cardinal rule of his religion, contained in Liber Al, was, "Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, love is the law, love under will." He believed that the old age of Jesus was ruled by love, agape in the Greek, but in the new age of Horus or Set, that love would be subordinated to the ironclad will, Thelema, of the master magician. He was known to be sympathetic to the rise of Hitler, and some of Crowley's disciples have since claimed that Hitler was the result of Crowley's magical attempts to conjure up the warrior lord of the 40s, a prophetic phrase from Liber Al. If Hitler knew of Crowley, there is no historical evidence for it, although they both shared a common hatred of Jews and a fascination with black magic. Crowley went through numerous women, and some men. He was militantly bisexual, and ruined the lives of almost all of them. His first wife, Rose, ended up institutionalized as an alcoholic. In addition to being racist and anti-Semitic, he was also quite sexist. He taught that the best women were whores, and that the highest religious experience any woman could ever hope to achieve was to experience sex with the beast. Thus, he tended to mock the beginning Wiccan movement of friend and colleague, Gerald Gardner. He refused to become a witch, saying that he didn't want to be bossed around by a bunch of women. He tried to found an abbey dedicated to his religion on the island of Sicily, but was thrown out of the country by Mussolini's regime because of incredibly rank immorality, a suspicious death and rumors of human sacrifice. He spent his declining years a heroin addict living next to a cemetery in England. When he finally died in 1947, even his funeral scandalized the British press. Crowley's greatest poem, The Hymn to Pan, was read over his coffin, and the papers called it a black mass. Ironically, Crowley, like Aquino a generation later, would not have called himself a Satanist. He felt they were heretics. He was a Thelemite and a Luciferian, a worshipper of the undefiled light of Lucifer. Yet he rejoiced when the newspapers called him the wickedest man in the world and the great beast. A satanic vision. It was to the mantle of Aleister Crowley that Michael Aquino seemed to aspire. While Levi used some of Crowley's concepts and materials as they suited him, Aquino took Crowley and his gospel quite seriously. In fact, Aquino saw his mission as, to destroy the influence of conventional religion in human affairs, not so much that we want everyone to be converted to Satanism as an institutional religion, but that we want to unravel the web of fear and superstition that has perpetuated all formal beliefs. Satanism should not be just another religion. It should be an unreligion. Soon, the issue of whether or not Satan/Set was a real being exploded between the two master magicians. After the schism, Aquino sought guidance from Satan on June 21, 1975. Allegedly, the man downstairs actually manifested as Set to Aquino and brought forth a revelation entitled The Book of the Coming Forth by Night. Aquino asserts that a new Setian epoch, which began in 1904 with the work of Aleister Crowley, was nearing completion. His book would be a sequel to Liber Al and would usher in the Aeon of Set. Thus, Aquino claims he was anointed by Set to be Aleister Crowley's true successor, the second beast as well as the great beast prophesied in the Bible. Aquino has tried to disassociate himself from some of the nastier statements in the Satanic Bible. This was necessary, especially in the late 1980s, when accusations of satanic ritual abuse began to sweep across the country. Good public relations demanded that the Temple of Set be above such things. In spite of all the protests, it must be pointed out that the god and the magical current with whom Aquino identifies is not a very wholesome influence. The remainder of this chapter will demonstrate that, if anything, the Temple of Set is a more deadly institution than Levi's church. A call to dark gods. It is helpful, when examining the actual ideology of Aquino's temple, to look at what the man himself considers to be his significant magical achievements. One such rite about which Aquino has boasted is highly suggestive. Like Levi, he seems fascinated with Nazi occultism. Whether he got his fascination with the Nazi technologies of ceremonial magic from Levi, or whether Levi got it from Aquino is not known. The point is, however, both men seem obsessed with the magical practices of Hitler's elite. Though this is not widely known, Hitler, a devout Catholic, designed his SS by combining the Jesuit order's principles, spiritual exercises, and teachings, with the contemporary magical societies in Germany such as the Vril Society and the Thule Gesellschaft. Hitler himself was an initiate into sorcery and wished to replace Christianity with the worship of the gods of Germanic paganism. Toward that end, he constructed a secret temple at Wolfsburg Castle. All of what went on in that temple is not known, but our own leaders within the Satanic Brotherhood told us that, aside from Hitler's anti-Semitism, there was a more awful reason for the death camps. Hitler believed he was working toward the ultimate human sacrifice of 7,777,777 Jews. God's chosen people, 7 sevens, a numeric combination sacred to Crowley's Scarlet Woman, the consort of the new Aeon. Had he been able to achieve that, they told us, the Judeo-Christian religion would have been forever destroyed and the pagan gods would have ruled supreme. The energies raised by each one of those deaths were to be channeled directly through Wolfsburg like a kind of magical laser beam to open the gate and unleash Götterdämmerung through a special convergence or vortex of power lines believed to converge on the site of the castle. Thus, Wolfsburg Castle was the spiritual core of Nazi Germany. Here, Himmler and his elite SS cadres held rites in the Hall of the Dead to invoke Götterdämmerung, the destruction of God and the re-enthronement of the Norse gods of blood and death. Fortunately, God had other plans, and this castle was bombed into near ruin by the Allies during World War II. In October 1984, Aquino traveled to Wolfsburg to invoke its energies and supposedly experienced another satanic epiphany in the ruins of the spiritual heart of Nazism. In Valhalla, the north tower of the castle, he did a magical working, and had a profound mystical insight. This is where he got the idea of humanity's self-consciousness and its estrangement from its fellow creatures. Aquino now teaches that Set represents this principal alienation which separates man from the rest of the universe. That is an adequate, if secular, definition of sin. Aquino chose to make the personification of sin his god. No wonder his idea of a deeply religious event is invoking energies in the metaphysical bastion of the Nazi order. One would have to wonder about the morality, to say nothing of the sanity, of a man who would choose to go to such a place and drink deeply from its spiritual springs. Letting Set speak for himself? To get an even more significant handle on where Aquino really stands, it might help to take a closer look at the book which his hero, Aleister Crowley, brought forth. If Aquino truly believes himself to be Crowley's successor, then something of his worldview should be evident from reading the book supposedly communicated by Set through his mouthpiece, Iwas. By this time, it might not surprise the reader to learn that the book transmitted from Set, Liber Alvel Legis, is more vile than Levi's satanic Bible. But there is a significant difference between the two. Levi's book doesn't really claim to be anything more than a book, even though many Satanists view it almost as unholy writ. However, Liber Al claims to be the communication of a spirit giving oracles from a god which will supplant the Bible. Thus, presumably most Setians, and certainly Aquino, would regard it as divine revelation. So what does Liber Al teach as its theology? Here are some choice samples, from chapter 1, these are fools that men adore, both their gods and their men are fools. 1:11 Now ye shall know that the chosen priest and apostle of infinite space is the prince priest, the beast, and in his woman called the scarlet woman is all power given. 1:14 The word of sin is restriction. 1:41 From chapter 2, Behold, the rituals of the old time are black. Let the evil ones be cast away, let the good ones be purged by the prophet. 2:6 I am the snake that giveth knowledge and delight and bright glory, and stir the hearts of man with drunkenness. To worship me, take wine and strange drugs whereof I shall tell my prophet, and be drunk thereof. 2:22 I am alone, there is no God where I am. 2:23 There is great danger in me, for who doth not understand these runes shall make a great miss. He shall fall down into the pit. There he shall perish with the dogs of reason. 2:27 I am unique and conqueror. I am not of the slaves that perish. Be they damned and dead. 2:49 From chapter 3, Now let it be first understood that I am a God of war and of vengeance. I shall deal hardly with them. Choose ye an island. Fortify it. Dung it about with the enginery of war. With it you shall smite the peoples and none shall stand before you. 3:3-8 Trample down the heathen, be upon them, O warrior, I will give you of their flesh to eat. Sacrifice cattle, little and big, after a child. 3:11-12 Mercy let be off, damn them who pity. Kill and torture, spare not, be upon them. 3:18 For perfume mix meal and honey and thick leavings of red wine, then oil of aubermelon and olive oil, and afterward soften and smooth down with rich fresh blood. The best blood is of the moon, monthly, then the fresh blood of a child, or dropping from the host of heaven, then of enemies, then of the priest or of the worshippers, last of some beast, no matter what. 3:23-24 I am the warrior lord of the 40s, the 80s cower before me and are abased. I will bring you to victory and joy, I will be at your arms in battle and ye shall delight to slay. 3:46 There is no law beyond do what thou wilt. 3:60 Such teachings embody perfectly the very things hardcore Satanism are accused of putting into practice. Drugs, cattle mutilations, and child sacrifice are glorified. Although Aquino denies that his group practices or teaches such things, this is the evident, obvious legacy of Set which Aquino has chosen as his own. Murder, torture, bigotry and hatred of God howl out of Liber al. Aquino's tampering with these energies may yet detonate in his face. Persistent charges of possible child abuse have dogged him since 1987 at the Presidio in San Francisco. Although no charges have stuck and Aquino has filed a suit against the city, accusations are not going away. From a spiritual perspective, it would be amazing if a man who literally bathes in the fountainhead of evil were not to be tempted by its most contemptible aspects. 8. Dealing with the Brotherhood. It was as though in those last minutes, he was summing up the lessons that this long course in human wickedness had taught us, the lesson of the fearsome, word and thought-defying banality of evil. Hannah Arendt. I sought an answer from what I thought was God. At the height of my seeking, I received a large manila envelope in the mail, apparently an answer to my search for an omen or sign. Within it, I discovered a journal from an occult group called the Order of the Black Ram. It was rather intelligently laid out, and I was intrigued. They belonged to the rapidly growing number of satanic groups who felt Levi was a rip-off artist who was giving Satan and Satanism a bad name. They referred to Levi's outfit as comic opera Satanists, and spoke of getting down to serious Satanism. The level of the writing and editorial quality was several cuts above most occult newsletters. They even spelled the words right. What caught my eye more than anything else was an article by someone who called himself Orion, Ipsissimus, High Priest, and King of the Morning Star. The rank of Ipsissimus, meaning self of uttermost selfness, is the highest attainable rank in all of magic. It is 10th degree, and signifies that one has literally become a god incarnate. For someone to proclaim himself an Ipsissimus, he either had to be insane or a master indeed. The article was even more arresting than its author's proclamation. It was extremely well written and dealt with the story of the war between God and the devil from Satan's point of view. The article implied that Lucifer let God win for occult reasons. It said there was a secret pact between God and Lucifer to pretend to be foes to give the created beings under them a viable choice. In this context, hell was not a place of punishment, but a place where people could go who were rebels, individualists and artists. Heaven would be for the mellow, do-nothing types, for closed personalities whose idea of fun was a church picnic and hot game of horseshoes. Hell would be a place of great challenge and excitement, with rock music, non-stop sex, drugs, and total freedom of artistic expression. The whole arrangement was designed because God did not want the malcontents making his heavenly citizens fret. He needed a place to put them, and a just reason for doing so. Thus, the devil and hell came into being as a boot camp for gods. Bells started going off inside. This explains so many philosophical questions everyone had about the nature of evil and free will. I was supremely impressed, and immediately wrote this Orion, not his real name, a letter telling him so. Was this the answer to my prayers? Could I still serve both Jesus and Lucifer? By now, I was so deceived, this was actually what I'd prayed for. Apparently, as far as Satan is concerned, what you pray for is what you get. It made sense. For the pious Catholics, I could be a pastor, leading them toward the pearly gates. For the anarchistic witches in our covens, I could offer them eternal, passionate ecstasy in the kingdom of Satan. The letter I got back from this Orion chap was a bit strange. It was included with a newsletter of his own which was a bit lurid. The cover showed the goat of Mendez presiding over an orgy of naked people indulging themselves. The inside included articles on Lucifer's side of things, each more intriguing than the last. It also denounced white witchcraft. The journal claimed to be the ultimate source for hardcore Satanism. The letter was written in a childish scrawl in black ink on quality scarlet paper, with an expensive satanic goat's head letterhead. It expressed the usual pleasantries and said that we must arrange to meet, since Orion only lived down in Wheaton, Illinois. It was signed by Orion, Ipsissimus, High Priest, and King of the Morning Star. My immediate reaction was that Orion's handwriting was his worst asset, and that he should invest in a typewriter or a secretary. It actually looked like the hand of someone trying to write with their wrong hand. Otherwise, the philosophy was intriguing. Perhaps this was the way I should go. He requested a photo, so I sent him one of me in full Catholic bishop's robes, but wearing the satanic medallion bearing a huge sword I had received from Levi. He sent a photo back which depicted him wearing a scarlet, hooded robe which concealed all but his goatee-covered chin, and his left hand was raised in the Cornu sign, the traditional salute of Satanists the world over. All that remained was to meet. He suggested that he come up and meet those of our group who were into the darker stuff, as he put it. So, he drove up one day, arriving about 3 hours late. Somehow, he did not live up to expectations. Conversations with an ipsissimus. He was a small fellow, both in height and build, and was dressed like a biker, with a battered brown fedora that looked like something Indiana Jones threw away. With him, he brought his driver, a strapping young fellow of few words with an Ozzy Osbourne t-shirt. Also accompanying him was a young blonde girl who spoke almost nothing the entire time. She seemed primarily to serve by staring constantly at Orion with worshipful adoration. Orion was handsome, in a roguish way, although his face and demeanor were somehow ferret-like. He had obviously not been to any finishing schools, or many starting schools either. Could this be the fellow whose pen had produced such profound thoughts? With us, we had about 4 other of our coveners who were heavily into Crowley and would not be frightened of a for-real Satanist. We sat around for a while and got looped, then gradually, our coveners trickled on home. Like Aquarius, my last mentor, Orion liked to consume intoxicating beverages by the case lot, but his chosen liquid poison was beer. As the number of Hillman's old styles within him increased, Orion waxed eloquent about his part in the Brotherhood of Satan. He claimed to have been orphaned at an early age and raised by a stepfather who was heavily into Freemasonry. At an early age, he ran away and headed to California, the satanic capital of the U.S. There, he tried the Church of Satan, but thought them too white. He got involved with biker Satanists and moved around the coast with the Hells Angels for a while, slicing up cats and women and raising hell. He showed me his arms, which were crawling with tattoos of devils, heads and skulls. He then told me, in hushed tones, of a control center, a Pentagon or NORAD of satanic power, which existed near Los Angeles. Its absolute head, a fellow with the code name of Adrian, took Orion under his wing. This man was so rich and powerful, no one in the Southern California/Hollywood scene would dare cross his path. Conspiratorially, Orion informed me that Roman Polanski had dared to make a movie, Rosemary's Baby, that only alluded to Adrian's existence, and look what happened to his family. Polanski's wife, Sharon Tate, and several friends were butchered by lackeys of Charles Manson. With a dark leer, he told me he knew Manson personally, and for a while had belonged to the same group that had given Manson his training, the Church of the Process of the Final Judgment. Adrian apparently saw in Orion the fulfillment of satanic prophecy, and magically adopted him as his own son. This was done on a hillside ringed with lightning as 3 virgin girls were crucified upside down to raise the power. He watched me to see if I would be shocked by this revelation. I was, but didn't let him know it. He was pleased when I didn't gape at him in horror. He explained to me that for the ultimate in power magic, the shedding of blood was essential. For minor magic, a hamster or cat was all that was needed, but the high art called for human blood to be spilled out upon the ground. Good to the last drop, he chortled. That was why Lucifer had to kill Jesus to free humanity, Orion informed me sagely. Now they were free to either go to heaven or hell, whereas before all had been forced to go to heaven, an utterly dull place. He told me that Christianity was created by Satan as a symbiotic counterpart to Satanism. The Christians were the sheep and we were the wolves, he said. For a Christian, the holiest act they can commit, is to die a martyr for the faith. Then they go straight to heaven. For a Satanist, the holiest deed that they can do is murder a Christian, preferably a young, virgin Christian. Orion claimed that fact invalidated much of the hogwash written about the devil. If the devil really wanted souls, why would he have his followers killing virgins and babies when they would be the only ones assured of going straight to heaven? If the devil was trying to steal souls from God, wouldn't it make more sense to kill older people who were unrepentant sinners? I had to admit that it would. It was strange, but as I listened to Orion, I watched as his personality submerged and a thing, dark, feral, complex and incredibly powerful, came to the surface. It was more than just the beer. He began to speak with an preternatural intelligence. Orion was possessed, and I wanted to understand the being who was speaking through him. I sensed more power emanating from him than I had ever dreamt of. The thing within Orion knew I wanted knowledge and wisdom more than anything, and it was playing me for all it was worth. I was shocked at the prospect of human sacrifice. It went against all I'd ever believed. But then much of what I now believed went against what I used to believe. Yet I knew that blood had been shed at my first witchcraft initiation, my own. I knew that in Wiccan folklore, there were special times when witches offered themselves up as willing sacrifices for some greater cause. This supposedly took place during the time of the Spanish Armada when England was in danger of invasion, and also during the time of the Battle of Britain in World War II. The assertions Orion was making made a strange kind of sense in the contorted Crowley-esque universe I had built for myself. Orion said that Christians and Satanists were made for each other, like sheep and wolves. There were many Christians whose lives had no other purpose than to be offered up on an altar to Satan. Otherwise, how could it have continued for so long? He asked me, is it evil of the wolf to kill the sheep to do just what it was made to do? I had to admit that it didn't seem as though it would be. He told me that almost every quarter of the year the body of a young girl, usually a Christian child, turned up in a river near his home, slain by obviously satanic means. Yet nothing was ever done. He said the authorities knew who was doing it, but dared not touch them because of how powerful they were. In fact, many of the authorities were Satanists in secret. How else could they rise to positions of authority? Face it, little brother, Orion said, his eyes rhapsodic with animal lust which thrilled me beyond all reason. Lucifer is the god of this world. All power and authority are his to give and take away. Even the Nazarene admitted that. You want power, or money? You must deal with the master. He then belched, filling the night air with beer fumes. It was so incongruous to be speaking with this semi-literate biker about such profound things and have him responding with such inspired malignancy. He told me he had all the money he ever needed. Adrian kept feeding thousands of dollars into an account in a local Wheaton bank. You've got to stop fooling around with this Wicca garbage and start doing the will of the true Lord of Light, he told me. You need to tap the source of undefiled wisdom, wisdom which has not been trampled on by human souls. You've got too much potential to waste it on these suckers. They're all worshipping Satan anyway, but are just too naive to realize it. I asked him what I was expected to do. He laughed at me drunkenly, yet when he spoke, every word was clear. A dark scarlet flame shimmered behind his dark glasses, or was it just a reflection of distant car lights? Make a pact, little brother. Promise to serve him and give him your body, soul, and spirit forever, and anything you want will be yours. For 7 years, you will be Satan's slave. He will take very good care of you. At the end of that time, the master will kill you and take you to hell for an eternity of foul ecstasy. If you are a really dedicated slave, though, he may let you live on earth and serve him another 7 years. Who knows? It happened to me. I felt myself in the grip of a cold horror. Somehow I knew it would come to that. Still, I had to ask, what about Jesus? Orion smiled, or something smiled within him. You still don't understand, do you? He had to go through this, everyone does on their path to Ipsissimus. Remember what he said, not my will, but thine be done. Who do you think he was speaking with? His father? I ventured. Right, and his father is Satan. Their book even says in 2 Corinthians 4:4 that he is the god of this world. The Nazarene himself even said in John 12:31 that our master is the prince of this world. Don't you see? Having this person quote the Bible to me was even more unnerving than his supernatural sagacity. I told him I would give it serious consideration, and the strange dialogue ran down for the night. After he left with his motley crew, I discussed our dialogue with Sharon. She did not like Orion. Neither did I, for that matter. He would not have been my choice of a person to invite to tea. She did observe that our work in the craft had not brought us any material prosperity. I was still grinding away in a job at a junkyard recycling aluminum engine parts, and she was still at the hospital struggling to make ends meet. The idea of a pact also made her uneasy. But I asserted that if Crowley was right, then Satan, or Horus or Lucifer, was indeed the true Lord of this age and this universe. Jesus had held it in regency, for the 2,000 years of the age of Osiris. If the hawk-headed god of vengeance now ruled the universe, it made sense to make a fundamental commitment to him. It all hinged on what we chose to believe, the Bible or the book of the law. The Bible had been so twisted and distorted in my mind because of almost 9 years of occult interpretation and higher biblical criticism that it was relatively easy to see how the Bible could be used to prove the work of Crowley. The angel of light appears. So I did what I always did when confronted with some great spiritual decision. I went over to the friary and celebrated a Mass for myself, the Mass of the Holy Spirit. This Mass is used in Catholic lore for the intention of giving strong spiritual guidance or strength to someone in time of need or decision. I was bringing out the big guns. Father Daniel lit all the candles and cranked the organ up to fortissimo for the occasion. He sang "Come Holy Ghost" valiantly in his gravelly baritone, and I was, once again, touched by the man's simple piety. I went home and picked up my Bible studies in numerology. I was studying Revelation 13, and my eyes fell on the 18th verse, the most famous in the book. Here is wisdom. Let him that hath understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. I began adding up the numbers in the Greek Kabbalah, cross-checking them with other passages. Suddenly, through an insight leap that to this day leaves me puzzled, I knew with a blinding certainty that was terrifying and reassuring, that Aleister Crowley was a reincarnation of Jesus Christ. I had not taken any drugs, other than the communion, but I staggered back against the wall. The bedroom around me disappeared, and I felt bathed in a light so intense that it seemed to melt and fuse the very frontal lobe of my brain. I was driven to my knees by the sheer coruscating power of it. I have no idea how long I remained in that burning cascade, but it literally seared my eyes like an acetylene torch. They felt as if they had sand in them. I finally managed to reel back to my chair as the room returned to normal. My brain began working again, but with a strange, brittle lucidity. I felt as if I was coming off some extremely powerful acid, and perhaps it was a flashback. I could almost feel the neurons in my brain kick in and fire, like spark plugs on a long unused car being churned to life. Let's see, if Crowley was Jesus, then, according to occult doctrine, he must be even more evolved now, nearly 2,000 years later, than he was as Christ. Therefore, the Thelemic doctrine of Horus, Satan, must be the true Christian doctrine for this time. I felt so relieved. No matter that there was no scriptural backup for my insight. No matter that it flew in the face of common sense. It felt true inside me, with a power that brought me to my knees in trembling awe. It was truly the logical progression of my mind into deception, the gradual unveiling of the light of Lucifer. That was all it took. The pact and the miracle. So, I was off and running. I called Orion and was set up for the ceremony on the next dark moon. I shared my experience with Sharon and she accepted it very reluctantly. She declined to go through the ceremony with me, partly because of a personal dislike for what Orion stood for, and partly because of deep misgivings she had about the whole process. In a dramatic setting, I made my profession for the devil. I was taken blindfolded to a large park somewhere in suburban Chicago, full of Egyptian sculpture and altars. Orion assured me that it was owned by Satanists secretly, and that no one would dare bother us. Orion stood behind the trapezoidal-shaped cement altar, robed in scarlet. I stripped off the white robe symbolizing my prior innocence, and knelt before him and affirmed my utmost loyalty to Satan. This process included signing a pact with him in my own blood, giving my body, soul, and spirit to him. Orion called upon the power of Lucifer and a flame appeared upon the altar. My contract was thrown into the flames and consumed instantly, in a puff of scarlet fire. Then I was robed at last in the black robes of the Satanist and given a new name. As a final gesture of defiance, I had to trample on a crucifix. That touch, which I knew came from the Templar tradition, bothered me a bit. It was explained to me that it was to show contempt for what Christianity believed the cross to symbolize, not for the actual act of Jesus' crucifixion, which we believed set us free to serve Satan better. The following day I returned to Milwaukee, feeling vaguely unclean. I discussed it with Sharon, and she suggested I celebrate a Mass. We had a private little chapel in one of our bedrooms, complete with an altar and altar stone, with a relic of Saint Francis, which Father Daniel had generously provided. I said another Mass of the Holy Ghost seeking some sort of confirmation for what I was doing, but was totally unprepared for what happened. At the point of the consecration of the wine, as soon as I spoke the words of institution, the wine did something it was always supposed to do, but never did. It turned to blood. Real blood. I was, to say the least, astonished. Both Sharon and the fellow who was serving Mass saw the chalice full of blood. Uncertain of what to do with it, I finished the Mass, but only drank a token amount of blood, enough to fulfill the ritual requirements. The rest I put in a special golden vial which I had in my Russian Orthodox kit designed for the transportation of the sacramental wine to the sick. I took the vial to my bishop, and he had it analyzed in turn by the lab in the hospital where his wife, Peg, worked. The analysis came back reporting human blood, but of a type absolutely unknown. Quickly we saw that it could only have been the blood of Christ. I took that as a genuine miracle, and set myself to work in my new magical system. We held black masses in our chapel, and baptized several of our covenants into Satan's church. Now I had to win 7 souls to him. Within weeks, I got 3 of our people to sign pacts with the devil for monetary or sexual gain or magical power. Sadly, I began to especially delight in the corruption of innocence, and was thrilled with the 6th person I recruited, one who had been a devout, Catholic woman who was the very soul of naivete and trust. I was going down the tubes, morally speaking, but I was filled with a vile, despiteful power which clouded much of my feelings. When she finally signed the pact I felt a consummate and blasphemous triumph. I watched her become defiled before my very eyes as if an obscure, shimmering shadow washed over her body and face. I joined my laughter with hers as the dark lights of Lucifer reflected out of her eyes at me. It was especially sweet because I then got to commit adultery with her as part of the rite. More even than the sex, I enjoyed the experience because I thought it would hurt the false god who was Satan's foe through her. The 7th candidate was easy, a sorceress near lunatic who was eager to sign the pact. He was heavily into Lovecraft and Satan, and was just looking for someone to sign him up. After this, I was allowed a copy of the satanic grimoire, the Great Mother, to copy a few of the ultra-secret ceremonies I needed to progress. I began seeking out students to corrupt from nearby Marquette University. I didn't think I was corrupting them, I thought I was enlightening them. In keeping with my own past, I found the Catholic students from Marquette particularly fertile fields for sowing the seeds of Satan. In the relatively brief time I actively sought out satanic converts, I managed to enlist several young people to Satan worship from the campus, all but one of them active Dungeons and Dragons enthusiasts. The higher biblical critics had done their work well on the Marquette campus. Those poor children didn't know what to believe, but they were spiritually starving. God forgive me, I provided the poisoned bread of Lucifer to feed them. 9. The infrastructure of Satanism. And Jesus knew their thoughts, and said unto them, Every kingdom divided against itself is brought to desolation, and every city or house divided against itself shall not stand, and if Satan cast out Satan, he is divided against himself, how shall then his kingdom stand? Matthew 12:25-26. We have talked about what the Bible tells us about the devil, and we have discussed some of the broader issues surrounding the existence of satanic cults in this country. Now, we are going to get specific about Satanism itself. When there is little or nothing above ground to study, things usually do not get investigated. This is why little has been written on the hardcore satanic brotherhood before this century, indeed, this generation. Today, Satanism has exploded upon the scene with a vengeance. Popular entertainers and public figures endorse it. Rock musicians openly flaunt its symbols and preach its gospel. Leading Satanists such as Zena Levy and Michael Aquino appear on talk shows, defending their faith against the charges of child abuse and murder. A history of Satanism is not what we are doing in this chapter. A good, readable but scholarly book on all this is Professor Karl Raschke's volume, Painted Black. Instead, we are going to get practical and examine it as a functioning entity in the world today, and how it impacts us and our families. Here is a necessarily broad definition of Satanism that we put together. Satanism involves the worship of a god which represents the dark side of the cosmos. This god is known by various names, and usually personifies at least the bestial, animal parts of man, if not evil itself and the worst features of human nature. Satanism often involves the use of drugs and trance, i.e. demonic possession. The ethics of Satanism are, at best, a law of the jungle survival of the fittest, and are frequently a conscious inversion of morality. Satanism is obsessed with death, and its rituals often involve cursing, the shedding of blood, and either animal or human sacrifice. This definition is a large enough umbrella to even fit underneath it the so-called religious or organized Satanists like Anton Lavey, although they categorically deny any involvement with drugs or blood sacrifice. But they have to. They are legally constituted churches, and can hardly admit to breaking the law. Slicing up Satan's pie. From that large definition, we need to break down some basic categories, then examine those categories. Since people have begun taking a serious look at the phenomenon of devil worship in the late 20th century, experts of various degrees of competence have tried to classify the different types. Their classification system is probably as good as any. It is important for the Christian to understand that although some of these varieties do not even profess a belief in a real, personal devil, and many would deny doing anything illegal, they are all almost certainly lost and destined to spend eternity in hell. They are part of Satan's army, whether they believe in him or not. The typology of Satanists most commonly mentioned are based upon an expanded version of the model originated by Dr. Dale Griffiths, a Tiffin, Ohio police captain and one of the pioneers in the scientific and criminological investigation of occult crime. 1. The Dabblers, 2. Religious or organized Satanists, 3. Rogue or solitary Satanists, 4. Cultural Spiritists, 5. Traditional or hardcore, often multi-generation, hereditary, Satanists. Let's take a quick look at each of these. 1. The Dabblers. These are usually adolescents, although more and more are kids 12 and under. We, and several others, have a quarrel with the use of the term dabbler, since it implies a degree of harmlessness which is altogether inappropriate. As Raschke puts it, one can dabble in Satanism about as readily as one can play around with heroin. Both almost instantly take the practitioner to a level of almost irresistible compulsion, and both are extremely difficult to escape without the help of the Lord. However, The term dabbler is used because these youngsters' involvement is often disorganized, uncalculated and random. Usually they are not associated with larger covens. The interest in Satanism on the part of young people might surprise many readers. However, it is by no means new. There have been times when Anton LaVey's infamous book, The Satanic Bible, was a bestseller on many of the country's college campuses. Sadly, it is a bestseller among junior high schoolers. Whatever LaVey's intent in writing the book was, it has come to represent a manifesto of nihilism and despair for many young people. Adolescents are difficult to understand, but one thing that all agree upon is that a fundamental part of being a teen is asserting your individuality. In this fallen world, that means teens tend to be rebellious. A little bit of rebellion is normal, and fights with parents happen. But many teens, for whatever reason, are overly ornery, and the Bible warns us that rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, 1 Samuel 15:23. If a teen gets into rebellion in an extreme way, he can be pointed to Satan as the ultimate romantic rebel model. Heavy metal rockers exploit this element of Satan's reputation. For the teen struggling with authority figures, Satan can become his god of rebellion. Satan's famous cry from Milton's Paradise Lost, "Better to reign in hell than serve in heaven," begins to sound mighty good to a young person chafing under what he or she perceives as restrictive and boring regulations. The rebellious teen raised in the Christian church often perceives services as hypocritical and lackluster. He seeks examples in the church which confirm his prejudices and comes to perceive heaven as being an eternity of insipid lifelessness. The lie from Satanists and the headbanger metal culture is that hell is an orgy of frenzied, drugged-out promiscuity, a place where Satan will encourage everything parents forbid. Or they are told that hell doesn't even exist, it is just a fairy tale made up like Santa Claus to frighten them into obedience. Thus, the teen comes to think of hell as a non-issue. Just as many adolescents deliberately dress or talk in ways which distress their parents, so the extremely intractable teen may make spiritual choices which he knows will dismay them. Once drawn into the rebellious, metal culture, the usual way that a young person is drawn deeper into Satanism is the pact. In popular ideas of Satanism, the idea of a pact with Satan is well known. Although elements within the pact may vary, the cardinal components are that the person sells his soul to the devil, and in exchange Satan promises to bestow power, magical or otherwise, fame, sexual favors or wealth. The youth who enters into this pact sells to Satan what Satan already has. Notice the evil elegance of the devil's trap here. He has managed to tag the paramount deficit in a teen's life, power. Most teens feel powerless. They are too young to be adults, but their bodies are rapidly becoming mature, so they are too old to be children. It doesn't help that the teen often gets mixed signals from parents. On the one hand, he is told to act mature and may be expected to do grown-up tasks, on the other hand he's told that he is not old enough to do other adult things. Satan knows this and exploits the young person's natural desire for power and control over their own environment and destiny. With the pact, Satan promises these adolescents they can have the power to overrule the authority figures which beset them. They can bend people, even parents, to their will. Unlimited supplies of money, sex, and drugs will be theirs, just sign on the dotted line, in their own blood. This is a beguiling offer to a young person who feels totally lost in the seas of adolescence. Unless there is someone reliable, compassionate, and knowledgeable there for him to talk to about this, and learn the truth about Satan's forked-tongue promises, he may well believe the lie. Any bookstore will be happy to provide him with a copy of LaVey's book. To an impressionable mind, the hateful polemics of the Satanic Bible become vivid images of a dark and painful spirituality which evokes the worst elements raging within him. Thus is born the dabbler. Usually, such dabblers are not connected to any organized satanic group, although a sizable minority are brought in by adults. Adults entice teens into covens through many methods: drugs, sex, and the infamous Dungeons and Dragons game. It is sad to say, but occasionally teachers or relatives of the teen are Satanists, and use their influence to beguile likely candidates. This author was a teacher for 2 years while a witch. I did my level best to entice the junior and senior high schoolers under my care into occultism. Most satanic groups have drugs and are delighted to supply them to teens, often free, in exchange for participation in covens. Sexually sophisticated witches often entice lonely youths, who feel flattered that an older, powerful adult thinks they are attractive. Tragically, sex is used to provide demonic access to the teen, 1 Corinthians 6:15-17. Dungeons and Dragons is frequently used by teachers or game shop owners who are witches to sift the local teens for youngsters with aptitude for sorcery. The roles one assumes in the game are excellent training for the novice witch. These dabblers, whether they are isolated or not, shouldn't be taken lightly. Although most such juveniles are not dangerous except to themselves, a number of them are led, either by demonic powers or the witches who recruited them, to perform violent and antisocial acts, including murder. However, even if such dabblers never hurt anyone, the damage they do to themselves, both emotionally and spiritually, is incalculable. Satanism gives them an anarchistic, nihilistic worldview in which all tender emotions become stunted and the worst aspects of humanity predominate. Violence or magic become the only solution to any problem, and any real love is made virtually impossible. 2. Religious Satanists are a subject all to themselves, and we have already discussed them, Levi, Aquino, et.al., in an earlier chapter. The next category is, 3. Rogue or solitary Satanists. Rogue Satanists are usually adults who are not connected with any satanic sect, but borrow liberally from Satanism to engage in crimes, often child molestation, rape, torture, murder, or all the above. Usually these people are loners who are unable to relate to people in a normal, healthy fashion. They choose to identify with Satan, the ultimate outsider. Often, they are further corrupted by heavy metal and slasher horror movies. The best-known recent rogues are Ted Bundy, the Night Stalker, Richard Ramirez and possibly Jeffrey Dahmer, from our old stomping ground of Milwaukee, WI. Some quibble over whether such people are Satanists who happen to be insane, or lunatics who happen to be Satanists. Such discussions are not meaningful. Dabbling in Satanism, for whatever reason, can open doorways in anyone's life and cause their sin nature to erupt. The fact that most of these loners are emotionally crippled products of dysfunctional families and often abused themselves, gives them an inner rage which Satan delights in igniting. They are excellent raw material, and end up as his pawns, foot soldiers in his war of spiritual terrorism. Whether Satanism or madness came first is not important. The key thing to realize is that books like the Satanic Bible and recording stars like Ozzy Osbourne, AC/DC or Motley Crue become triggers for these people and give them a hook upon which to hang their evil. They are real, and whether they realize it or not, they are part of Satan's master plan. They are his spiritual terrorists, going about spreading death, terror, and paranoia. 4. Cultural spiritists. These people are a bit harder to classify. These are devotees from non-Anglo cultures whose worship is a blend of African shamanism and Roman Catholicism. One study states, cultural spiritual faiths harmoniously blend magic or supernatural rites specific to one particular culture with certain religious traditions specific to another and very different culture. Today, it is estimated that between 1 and 1.5 million people living in America practice some sort of Afro-Caribbean faith. The vast majority of such practitioners are involved in two belief systems, Santeria and Palo Mayombe. The principal forms of cultural spiritism are, A. Voodoo, Obia, Voodoo or Hoodoo, Haitian, Caribbean, Louisiana, Southern U.S. This religion developed out of the slave trade from West Africa into the Caribbean. It stems from the African occult religion known as Juju, which dates back thousands of years to the Ashanti tribe, who were snake worshippers. This juju is then blended with Catholicism to produce the panoply of Voodoo Loa or demon gods. These Loa are most often identified with Catholic saints. For example, Statues of Saint Patrick are used to personify Danbala, the chief snake god, because Catholic iconography usually shows Patrick driving snakes out of Ireland. Voodoo rituals are usually presided over by a Hugan, priest, and / Mambo, priestess. A major part of the rites are devoted to enabling practitioners to be ridden, i.e. possessed, by the Loa. B. Santeria, or Lakumi, Cuban. Again, Santeria is a blend of Catholicism and African religion, most notably the southwestern Nigerian tribe of Yoruba. Like Voodoo, the Santeros, priests, have renamed their African gods or orishas after Catholic saints. 4 components make up the ritualistic end of Santeria: divination, sacrifice, usually animal, spirit possession, and initiation. Since the 1980 Mariel boat lift out of Cuba, significant numbers of Santeria believers have ended up in most American cities, possibly as many as 2 million, mostly in the Cuban and Hispanic populations. See Palo Mayombe, Mexican/Caribbean. This represents the darker side of Santeria. Mayomberos, those who practice this religion, often center around the spirit of the dead, and use their magic to inflict misfortune, torture or death upon an enemy. Oddly enough, those Mayomberos which practice good or neutral magic are called Mayomberos Cristiano, Christian Mayomberos. And those who practice evil magic are called Mayomberos Judeos, Jewish Mayomberos. Palo Mayombe also comes from a blend of Yoruban, Congolese, and Catholic beliefs, but is much more overtly evil and dangerous. Human sacrifice is definitely practiced. This religion is the basis for the fictional cult scene in the film, The Believers. De Candomblé, Brazilian. Essentially, this is a Brazilian form of Santeria. It is considered also to be more oriented toward the dark side. Ishango, Trinidad. The form of Santeria practiced in that nation. Many practitioners of these faiths assert, naturally, that they are harmless, and that the only sacrifices which are done are animal sacrifices. However, there is increasing evidence that these groups are using their magic to help bring drugs into this country. The infamous Matamoros murders were done by a cult which seemed to be a mixture of Candomblé and Palo Mayombe. Like all Satanists, these groups are lost and in need of salvation through Jesus. Also, although they tend to be confined mainly to the ethnic groups mentioned, they do spread into Anglo society with the same blandishments of power, wealth, or sex as do the more conventional kinds of Satanism. These are extremely powerful, sophisticated, and dangerous groups, and the magical technologies they use are surprisingly effective. Of course, they can be overcome by the blood of Jesus Christ. 5. Traditional or hardcore Satanists, multi-generational. If the rogue is Satan's foot soldier, then the multi-generational Satanist is certainly his elite special forces officer. Both are committed to striking terror into the heart of society, but the multi-generational Satanist, MGS, is more aware of his place in the scheme of things. MGS people are called in witchcraft circles hereditaries. This means they were born into their Satanism just like some people are born into Presbyterian, Baptist or Jewish families. Such Satanists are raised within the ideology of the coven, and are often part of a world so utterly different than what most of us experience that they might as well be alien beings. These MGS covens are families in which either witchcraft or Satanism has been practiced for generations, possibly centuries. It is important to understand that while all Satanists are witches, all witches are not Satanists in the strict sense of the word. White witches, or Wiccans, as they are often called, do not believe in a devil, and worship a mother goddess and a horned god. They are actually worshipping Satan behind the masks of their allegedly gentle deities, but many of them do not understand this fact. It is our experience that the higher-level Wiccans do know the truth, but keep it concealed from the public, and from lower-level initiates to the craft. The hereditary Satanist families could go back to England or other European countries, and are often tied into old money. When one is born into an MGS family, one of two things usually happens. Either the child is pampered, trained in magic and taught to regard itself as a living god upon the earth, or the child is victimized horribly from an early age and basically turned into a walking nest of fears and hatreds. In either case, they receive no modeling in trust or love. Why some children are victimized and some are not often has to do with all sorts of obscure occult doctrines such as birth order, astrology charts, the gender or hair color and complexion of a child. MGS families often go out of their way to appear normal and respectable. They will not dress in black, shave their heads or live in houses like the Addams family. They often pretend to be Christians and are pillars of the church and the community. Thus, it is quite possible for a good Christian to marry an MGS spouse and not even know it. Most Christians tend to be naive and trusting, so if someone says they are a Christian, they just believe them. We will talk more about discerning spirits and other topics later in the book. Sometimes one sibling can live a fairly normal childhood and the other will be a victim of horrid abuse. Another variable is that sometimes one parent is a Satanist and the other is not, but is ignorant of their spouse's true faith. In this case, at least one sibling will be victimized and the rest might well be left alone to live normal childhoods. It is in the context of these families that satanic ritual abuse, SRA, will usually occur. Ritualized child abuse or SRA is defined by one expert as, ritualized abuse is repeated physical, emotional, mental, and spiritual assaults which are combined with a systematized use of symbols, ceremonies and machinations designed to attain malevolent effects. These abuses may be repeated 1,000 times. The assaults target the physical level first, then the emotional, mental, and spiritual levels of the child. They are a planned, detailed program designed to turn the child against itself, society, and God. Our ministry, with one accord, has a prayer counseling arm which has ministered to literally dozens of SRA victims. The Lord has seen fit to bless our efforts and we will be spending more time discussing ministry prayer strategies later. For now, it is only important to understand that SRA usually occurs in a family of Satanists, and on more rare occasions in the context of schools, daycare centers, and, sadly, churches. People who speak about MGS groups and SRA are often accused of being part of the lunatic fringe, the same crowd that was screaming about fluoride in the water being part of a commie plot to ruin our health. Now, 20 years later, magazines carry stories about the carcinogenic qualities of fluoride in the water. The problem with conspiracy theories is that they often are proven to be right. People who have survived ritualized abuse as children have come forward to tell of being part of families where Satanism had been practiced for generations. Though their stories are difficult to prove, there are too many to utterly discount. A vast underground empire of drugs, child porn, and Satanism is proposed by these people. Is this a new phenomenon? Biblical evidence is clear that in the days of the Israelites in Canaan, there were entire civilizations which worshipped the devil under such names as Baal and Molech. The worship of these gods involved animal sacrifice, Judges 6:25, prostitution and sexual perversion, Ex 34:15. It also involved passing their sons and daughters through the fire to these gods, cf 2 Kings 17:16-17. This was burning the babies alive in the red-hot arms of an iron idol. We see that virtually all the components of Satanism were in place long before the time of Christ. After the apostles, another satanic factor appeared with the Black Mass or Mass for the Dead, which was done with blasphemous symbols mocking the Catholic liturgy. These were rituals performed to curse people. This is not difficult to understand when one realizes that the Catholic liturgy of the Mass or Eucharist is basically an occult ceremony. It is what would be called white magic. Thus, it was easy for Satanists to tweak it slightly to make it into the consummate black magic ritual. Such masses were condemned by the Council to Toledo in 681. Satanism reached popularity in the 18th to 19th century, when the Black Mass became in with the decadent aristocracy of Europe. However, never before have there been such widespread allegations of child abuse and satanic ritual. Are these MGS families isolated groups of rogues, or are they somehow linked? This is the controversial question. Few deny that there are families which have been Satanists for generations, but are these families part of a network? In the absolute sense, the answer must be a categorical yes. Jesus speaks about a conspiracy, led by the consummate conspiratorial terrorist himself. The Lord warns us that Satan comes to steal, kill, and destroy, John 10:10. He also notes that Satan's kingdom is not divided against itself, Matthew 12:25-26. Satan is a brilliant tactician, and he disperses his troops, both demonic and human, with great care. He is like a chess player who plans dozens of moves ahead. It would be foolish to think otherwise. Thus, it is difficult to imagine that Satan would allow thousands of his human slaves to move and function without a master plan behind it. Random energy is wasted energy, and praise the Lord, Satan's energy is limited. Thus, he cannot afford to squander it on a bunch of disorganized weirdos running around cutting up cats and people, and stumbling over each other. It makes logical and biblical sense that there would be a master plan or conspiracy behind what all these different MGS families are doing. Karl Raschke, in his excellent book mentioned earlier, suggests an additional evil, though mundane, element which may be fueling this conspiracy. Certainly, widely separate groups may all read Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible, or they may cast spells from the occult classic the Necronomicon. Yet they do not consort together, nor do they conspire in some clear-cut regimental fashion. A point regularly missed, however, is that the conspiratorial tie-in between diverse cells in the cultic organization may not have anything to do with religion at all. On the contrary, the linkage may be quite mundane and commercial: drugs. We may never know if these various underground groups are linked together physically, but you can depend on the fact that there are profound spiritual connections, and that very little goes on in any of them without the hand of Satan controlling it. The demons which control the leaders of each coven are in constant communication, and the entire nation is being conducted like a continent-wide, perhaps even worldwide, symphony orchestra by an unseen baton. These Satanists exult in the destruction of innocence. They rejoice in doing evil things, not because evil is fun, it usually isn't, but because they know that such things are sins, and that they are an offense to a holy God. They know that if Jesus loves the little children, then it must grieve him to have unspeakable things done to youngsters. This is more than just mental illness or sociopathology. These people are infernal engines driven by forces most people cannot even imagine. Just as we talk about sold-out Christians who are true bond slaves of Jesus, so Satan has his satanic saints, people who will do anything to serve their master. Are there really such people? Sadly, there are. I was one. The people who trained me were utterly given over to evil, and this iniquity passed to me like a spiritual contagion. I openly begged demons to possess me. Fortunately, before he could bring any hateful or truly murderous impulses to reality, I was snatched like a brand from the burning by the power of Jesus, and Satan had one less pawn. He whom the Son sets free is free indeed, John 8:36. If the material in this chapter troubles you, that is understandable. But understand that none of this evil is a surprise to God. It was all prophesied centuries ago in the Holy Bible. God is indeed still on the throne. He is continually reaching into the filth and mire of all forms of Satanism and setting his people free, using their experience to his glory, to help minister to others. Satan may be a master conspirator, but the Lord God has the power to overrule his plans with a flick of his finger. Many people think of this cosmic conflict as a chess game between God and Satan. However, make no mistake about it. Satan was defeated 2,000 years ago, and comes down among us having great wrath because he knows his time is short. We are seeing today thousands of years of prophecy come to pass. These horrible things we have described are but the monstrous death rattles of an ancient snake whose head was crushed by the cross of Christ. 10. The Cathedral of Pain. In the house of pain, there are 10,000 shrines. Aleister Crowley. I was only marginally aware of the great cosmic struggle between Aquino and Levi for control of the public awareness of Satanism. This was because I was deeply involved in what we called the deep stuff or the dark stuff. It definitely was not the right stuff. From the things we had been hearing through the grapevine, we felt like both Aquino and Levi were more or less either scheming the surface of Satanism or were acting like shills to draw people into the deep stuff. In either case, they were not any concern of ours. Instead, we were building on the foundations of what we had learned through our various satanic encounters and moving even beyond the bizarre metaphysics of Aquarius. Magical power was flowing through me as never before. I hate to say it, but hardcore Satanism is a lot like Shackley or Amway. I got bumped up like a direct distributor. Since I had gotten my 7 to sign their pacts for the devil, I had become eligible for ordination into the satanic priesthood, and the higher, European, levels of Freemasonry. Satan does honor his slaves, as long, and only as long, as they get him results. He began to throw little perks my way, especially once I became a satanic priest. Dope flowed through the covens like water. I had all I needed, and I never paid a cent for any of it. It was just there, somehow. Little minor, and not so minor miracles would happen. We discovered through our crystallomancy, the art of psychic vision through gazing into mirrors, crystals or convex glass, that a rival satanic coven had sprung up out of a nearby Jesuit church. We learned that they were even involved in infant sacrifice, a practice which, at least so far, I had found to be reprehensible. Our covens declared psychic war on their covens, and curses flew back and forth faster than hornets. One night, an astral attack came through our bedroom in the form of a huge, dark, robed figure with a dagger. We sent out our demon fetches to attack and they shredded the thing. Within a week, the group had packed up and left town, and we declared victory with a big coven party. As a priest of Satan, I would now officiate at pact ceremonies. I will never forget one in particular. We had set up our serious satanic temple in the attic of a huge house we were renting near Marquette University in Milwaukee. We had painted the entire front end of the attic black, and put down a huge magic circle on the floor. This was where we did our heaviest rituals, since it was the most private place in the house. Naturally, none of our white witchcraft pupils were allowed up there. Here I sat enthroned and officiated as a priest of the Desolate One, the most puissant Prince Lucifer, as people knelt before me and laid bare their very souls and bodies and offered them to him, through me. As they went through the ancient rubric, I experienced the presence of Lucifer all through me. It was like sitting in a sheet of white-hot fire which burned and seemed at times to melt my brain. When I spoke, I believed that it was Lucifer speaking through me, although I do not have any way of knowing that for certain. As we have said, Lucifer, unlike God, cannot be in more than one place at one time, so it may have just been one of the dukes or princes of hell, as we called them. However, whatever it was, it claimed to be Lucifer. Sometimes, the voice which spoke would shake the rafters of the old attic, and bits of dust, spider webs and decayed wood cascaded down upon us. Occasionally, the person submitting to the pact would actually cringe back in fear at the voice, and I would feel deep gratification within myself. One night a woman did not cringe back in fear. She openly and fearlessly knelt before her new owner in the center of the magic circle within a triangle of manifestation. This is not the normal practice. The circle is used by conventional magicians and sorcerers to protect themselves from demonic attack, or in the case of Wicca, to contain the cone of power raised from within the bodies of the witches. The triangle of manifestation is usually placed outside the circle, and is where the actual demon is permitted to appear in the clouds of incense smoke. Thus, the sorcerers stay within the magic circle and the demon's energy is bottled up and concentrated within the triangle. Now, however, we felt we needed no protection from demons. Indeed, we welcomed their presence and even their possession of our bodies. So this woman knelt in the very center of what we believed was demonic ground zero and prostrated herself, begging to have every and any demon in hell come into her. She swore herself to belong to Lucifer, body, soul, and spirit. At the close of the ceremony, after she had donned the robe of the devil worshipper and written her name on the pact, the power grew intense around me. The shimmering walls of blinding white energy around me burned through her mind as well. Then it swept up in a pyramid of power which shot through the rafters like a Roman candle, and the room was once again gloomy and silent, except for a distinctive pinging sound like a silver dollar hitting the flat black wooden floor. We both opened our eyes, and lo, there was a good-sized golden, perhaps bronze or brass, medallion still whirling into a flat position on the floor. It settled face up, and engraved upon it was one of the seals of Lucifer. As far as we could tell, the thing had manifested out of thin air, since we were alone in the attic temple. Naturally, the candidate was thrilled, and wore the medallion as a pendant everywhere she went. She also looked at me with new awe, since I had, without knowing how, brought something into being out of the ether. Naturally, I neglected to tell her that it happened without any foreknowledge or participation on my part. In spiritualism, that would have been known as being a physical medium, a fairly rare phenomenon. So we both felt pretty pleased with ourselves. It was another little bone Satan had cast to his dog to keep him interested in the game. Satan's sweatshop. One thing that the astute reader may have noted about the occult practitioner such as myself is that we are on a constant search for more secret wisdom, ever learning, but never able to come to a knowledge of the truth. 2 Timothy 3:7. It must seem that I spent my life wandering from place to place seeking new initiations, new secret orders, new thresholds of magical knowledge. This is true. Aleister Crowley, my idol, probably in the most literal sense of the word, once remarked that the path of the adept, advanced magician, was very much like mountain climbing, an art he knew quite well. Crowley claimed that in magic, just as in mountaineering, it was a matter of a steady effort upward with little time for relaxation. The mountain climber could hardly relax when he was on the sheer face of a peak, holding on with fingers and pitons. It was a matter of an unremitting grind of muscular exhaustion and willpower. Only rarely did the climber reach a little ledge or plateau where they might rest from the ordeal. This is what the magician experiences. If he or she relaxes or lets go for more than a brief span of time, there is danger of losing their grip and plummeting into the aforementioned abyss, the occult equivalent of hell, where they basically end up as magical roadkill. This is partially because in this kind of area, there are always others who want to either overthrow you or kill you, either magically or physically. It is like being a gunfighter. There is always someone who wants to prove that they are a more powerful adept than you. The rewards for this kind of savage interaction are intense, because if you kill another adept, the belief is that you inherit all his power, wisdom, and demons. So someone who kills several other adept magicians would become quite a formidable power in his nation. For example, when Levi dropped off the radar screen over a decade ago, the rumor in the Brotherhood was that he had been secretly killed by his daughter, Xena, so she could benefit by getting all her father's wisdom, accrued magical power and his power demons. This is apparently not true, but this kind of thing does happen with lesser-known Satanists at regular intervals. And why not? What within their twisted ethics would prevent such a battle from taking place? It is survival of the fittest, right? Another reason for the constant striving for new initiations, knowledge, and power is that Satan keeps pushing you. It is almost like being the donkey with the carrot and the stick. In Satan's sweatshop you never know which you are going to get. He is a cruel taskmaster and expects 110% from his slaves. Thus, Satanism has its own bizarre forms of legalism, just like every other religion Satan has created down through the centuries. You are constantly made to feel that if you slack up for a minute, either he will cause you to fall from favor and you will be cast out or even killed, or some other up-and-coming magician will pass you by, which could result in Satan giving him some extra magical tool which would enable him to kill you or at least reduce you to a gibbering idiot. It is like Dungeons and Dragons, except the stakes are unimaginably higher. This drives the magician to constantly be an overachiever. This keeps him too busy to step back and critically think of what he is actually doing. That is just how Satan likes his servants. It is in the context of this desperate, nearly frantic, search for more light, more wisdom, more truth that the following strange episode must be understood. The coming of the Illuminoids. I had not fully understood the phenomenon of this blinding light which I experienced in the evident presence of Lucifer, or at least Luciferian energies. Every now and then, Orion would drop sniggering hints about the light, but he was uncharacteristically close-mouthed about it. I never told him I had occasionally experienced the strange cerebral meltdown, and I don't know if he had other ways of knowing. He also made intermittent veiled references to the Illuminati. I had heard of the Illuminati, plural Latin term for illuminated ones. I had been told some years before by a Grand Master Druid that the Illuminati was another term for the highest levels of magic and Druidism, also known as the Great White Brotherhood or the A, standing for Argentinium Astrum, or Order of the Silver Star. I had also heard that the Illuminati were the leaders of an international conspiracy of Jews, elders of Zion, Jesuits, evil extra-terrestrials, communists, or bankers, or all of the above, which was trying to overthrow America. I had been kept too busy to ever try and figure out which, if any, of the above explanations bore any resemblance to the truth. In the past few months since I had experienced the initial epiphany of the white-hot, searing light, Orion kept making obscure references to the Illuminati. Then, one night, I had a quite extraordinary experience. I cannot say if it was real, a journey out of my physical body, called astral projection, or a dream, save that its consequences were very real. I was, by then, quite a seasoned astral traveler. I went out of my body quite frequently for various reasons. I had been practicing astral travel for almost a decade. However, this particular occasion was quite different. I was summarily yanked out of my body without my having any say in the matter. I had the image of being drawn up through the paths of the tree of life toward the zone of Bina or Saturn. My strange, involuntary journey took me to a vast, obsidian temple in the midst of whirling stars near what appeared to be the ringed planet of Saturn. The temple was flat black, with no reflectivity on its surface. It was angular, weird, and unlike any structure I had ever seen, except that the dominant architectural theme was of the trapezoid. The trapezoid is one of the most sacred shapes to Satan, for reasons too complex to relate here. The towers of the temple tilted just enough to make a person uneasy, and even from the exterior, the angles and geometry of the place seemed off. I was drawn to a trapezoidal door which was even darker than the temple itself, were that possible. Once within this black temple, I found the outer rooms filled with an uncanny greenish light. The room seemed very real, and I tried pinching myself to see if I was dreaming, without effect. I felt the cold black smoothness of the floor on my bare feet, and the goose flesh on my body was extremely authentic. A man came forward, dressed in a simple white robe. He was an older, distinguished gentleman with a beautiful head of white, wavy hair and a delicately trimmed mustache. He was not at all what I expected to find in such a place. With a kind and resonant voice, he greeted me and introduced himself as the Master H. I was told he would be my mentor and guide. He bade me follow him into the inner parts of the eerie black citadel. Nothing could have prepared me for what awaited me. The Cathedral of Pain. The room into which I entered was a kind of temple, perhaps as large as a good-sized church. There was nowhere to sit, and only a trapezoid-shaped altar on a raised platform in the center. The altar itself was made of rough concrete. It had twisted steel girders projecting from it at all angles, and it was evidently stained with blood. One such girder reared up from behind it to form a rude, upside-down cross. Behind the altar was a raised throne which looked much larger than life. The throne was black, absolutely smooth, and unoccupied. I somehow felt relieved that it was unoccupied. However, it was the only thing about the room which was reassuring. My distinguished guide turned to me and gestured expansively at the room, rather like an orchestra conductor. He said, quite without fanfare, "Welcome to the Cathedral of Pain." With those words, darkly brilliant lights came on silently behind the walls of the huge place, and I was so startled by what I saw that I nearly retched. The walls, which had appeared to be inward-leaning smooth black stone, were starkly revealed to be clear glass holding back a transparent green fluid. Floating within the fluid were dozens, if not hundreds of naked human bodies. They were all dead, most with expressions of exquisite terror etched in a rictus on their frozen faces. Many of them were mutilated in manners which sickened even me. For the most part, this grotesque aquarium-like display consisted of young people. All but a few seemed barely adult, and there was a poignantly large number of infants and toddlers floating among the rest. It was like they were preserved, floating in formaldehyde or some other god-forsaken substance, like a butterfly collection from hell. This ghoulish diorama glared out at me from all but one of the sides of what I now perceived to be a nine-sided room. 9 is one of the most highly prized numbers among Satanists, for it is the only number which reduces into itself, always. Only the wall behind the throne was still black stone. "These are the Master's children," proclaimed my guide, a strange kind of pride in his voice. "Are they not beautiful?" My throat felt so dry I could barely croak a response. In an unbelievably tragic way, many of them were beautiful. I am ashamed to admit a real response of lust to the sight of many of the women floating before me. This was like the most awful nightmare imaginable, except it was too real. "All who die thus are privileged to belong to the Master," H explained, apparently sensing and approving of my response. "And now you belong to him too, forever." The last statement was said with ominous finality, and I felt a sharp stab of terror that I might end up floating in the walls of this accursed place. Before I could move or speak, a pillar of light roared down out of the unseen caverns of the ceiling. It struck the obsidian throne in a blaze of sparkling flame so bright that it all but drove the horrid images of the floating forms from my sight. Out of the light appeared a huge being, difficult to describe. He, too, was robed in white, and had white hair flowing down to his shoulders. Mighty wings swept out from his shoulders. However, everything else about him shifted by the second. One moment he appeared to be a normal, but incredibly handsome man. The next, he had the face of a bull, and the next, the face of a beautiful woman. The brilliance of the light and the quicksilver changes taking place in the giant being before me made my eyes burn and water, so I rubbed them. I felt all too real grit in them, and was again astonished at the reality of this experience. My guide, H, brought me forward and assisted me in laying down on the cold, rough concrete altar. I was relieved that he did not put the large chains on me. I asked myself where I could run to. I had no idea where I was, or even if I was anywhere except in my own, insane mind. I could not, however, imagine that my mind could have conceived of so ghastly a place as this, even in a nightmare state. I felt oddly thrilled to be laying on the altar. It was almost as if my fear was drugged by the power flowing from the scintillating and chatoyant being on the throne. Suddenly, dozens of people emerged. They were robed as was my guide, except they wore hoods up over their heads. Both men and women were present. Oddly enough, I could hear the cold smack of their bare feet on the temple floor. Chanting began in Latin, Ave Satanas, Rege Satanas, Hail Satan, Satan rules, in deep, basso profundo tones, like Gregorian chant, but with very strange tonalities. "You have tasted of the illumination of our Master, the light bearer, and have been found worthy to receive the light," my guide told me. "Do you surrender yourself to the light?" My head felt as if it was buzzing, and yet I felt oddly placid and relaxed. I managed to say, yes, and the chanting grew louder. Abruptly, the being on the throne arose. I was astonished at how tall he was. He effortlessly straddled the large altar like an adult might tower over a tricycle. He reached out his left hand and placed it on my forehead. I had to shut my eyes for the light which glared forth. It seemed my eyeballs were turning to molten steel. My forehead was about to explode. I felt a claw tear into my brow, right between but slightly above my eyebrows, and insert itself into my brain like a white-hot poker. I tried to scream, but could not. My entire body felt like it was going to burst from being filled with roaring, flaming hot light. Another claw touched me, and I felt a stinging pain. Then both hands withdrew. A voice spoke, the same voice I had heard booming from within me on numerous ritual occasions. Now, you are mine forever. The entire vast chamber suddenly rumbled with 100 voices chanting, glory and love for Lucifer, hatred, 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 to God accursed, accursed, accursed. It felt as if the talon was burning into my very mind. My body shook on the altar with the power of the chanting. I felt like a fish on the end of a hook being hauled out of the water by my very brain. I screamed in pain, but it came out, glory and love for Lucifer, hatred, 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 to God accursed, accursed, accursed. A deafening thunderclap shook the cathedral. I was swept off the altar at incredible speed and carried into the awful wall of corpses. For a second I thought I was going to be placed among them, and I finally managed a scream. But before the scream was finished, I was through the wall and traveling on what seemed to be a lightning bolt, crashing through clouds and hurtling toward the earth. In less than a second, I found myself face down in the rain-soaked lawn of my own backyard, surrounded by the unmistakable smell of ozone. The grass around me looked oddly scorched, and a smoke rose from the lawn which smelled like a lawn baking in the summer afternoon sun. Was it a dream? I cannot say. But if it was, I sleepwalked from our bedroom out to the middle of the backyard in pouring rain, without awakening anyone. I had never been given to sleepwalking, and Sharon awakens at the drop of a pin. My life was profoundly changed from that time on. If that being was indeed Satan, he had given me a mark the first was to carry with me for many years to come. That mark was a sign that I was his property, and I could never forget it. It was a nightmare, but one from which I could not awaken. 11. The Waltz of the Sadducees. Love not the world, neither the things that are in the world. If any man love the world, the love of the Father is not in him. 1 John 2:15. Many times when I am speaking about Satanism in churches, the question comes up, why are we seeing all these things happening today? My parents never heard about Satan, worshippers or people being possessed by the devil. If these kind of phenomena are out there, why hasn't the church been dealing with them all along? It is an important question, and one that deserves a serious answer. This is partially because there are people out there, both unbelievers and sincere Christians, who would have us believe that the reports we are getting about Satanism and demonic affliction are the results of either disordered minds or sensationalism on the part of either journalists or even ministers of the gospel. Some Christian leaders cannot imagine that this sort of problem has been going on for centuries under the very nose of the church, and that no one has discovered it until the past couple of decades or so. They ask why the discernment of the Spirit would not have detected it. They also ask questions like, where are the bodies and other physical evidence from all these supposed ceremonies? And, where do these Satanists get the people to sacrifice? Such considerations reflect both a naive understanding both of the history of the church and human nature. They also neglect the impact of the twin secular heresies of rationalism and scientism upon Western culture, including the church. We are caught, today, in the crush between a Bible-based worldview and a modernist, secular worldview. It is sad to say that far too many leaders in the church have been trying to be good servants of the Lord and yet still bow the knee at the Baal altars of science and secularism. It is almost as if they rejoice in the respectability Christianity has attained in some areas of society and cringe at the thought of someone talking about Satan or demons and messing it all up for them. Many of these Christians are utterly sincere. Unfortunately, they are as unaware of the defiling impact Western culture has had upon them as a fish is of the water in which it swims. Our culture is pervasive, and made more so by the omnipresent TV and radios. Uncritical acceptance of cultural presuppositions can lead to some real problems when you find yourself face to face with the gore-drenched jaws of Satan. The Sadducees are back. Most Christians, even leaders and teachers, do not give a great deal of thought to the spirit realm. This is what one missiologist, Dr. Paul Hibert, has called the phenomenon of the excluded middle. What this means, simply, is that most people in the West, industrialized nations, believe in the rational, everyday world of cars, telephones, etc. They do not give much, if any thought to any dimension of spiritual reality. Christians in these industrialized nations, like America, obviously do believe in God and Jesus Christ. They do acknowledge the existence of the Trinity of Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. They believe, hopefully, in the Bible, and in what is historically recorded therein. However, they tend to only see those two dimensions: 1, the real world of day-to-day existence; 2, God's dimension. In doing so, they reflect a uniquely Western, post-rationalist, i.e., scientific, empirical, mindset which is not really biblical. People forget that the Bible is an Oriental book, written by men as inspired by the Holy Spirit, 2 Peter 1:21. Its view, which is to say, the Lord's view, is not particularly Western or rationalistic. It is a worldview in which there are virtually daily encounters between the divine, the angelic and the human. This is the mindset which most of the world still holds. It is a mindset which includes a world above the human, day-to-day realm in which we do our business, but below the world of God. This is the angelic realm or the spirit realm, populated by angels, both elect and evil, and demons. This is the middle realm, missing or excluded from the thinking of most Western Christians. I have spoken with Christians who are sincere and intelligent, but who actually think that the spirit realm has little or no impact upon them. They think there is perhaps an occasional demon over in China, and that once in a great while, some missionary in dire straits might see an angel. However, by and large, they have shut the idea of day-to-day interaction with the numinous out of their lives. Some even believe such interaction is dogmatically impossible. In a way, it is possible to compare such people to the ancient Jewish sect of the Sadducees in Jesus' time. The Jewish theological aristocracy in that day was essentially divided into the Pharisees and the Sadducees. The chief distinguishing feature of the Sadducee sect was that they did not believe in the resurrection or angels and spirits. See Matthew 22:23, Acts 23:8. The Sadducees were very devout in their religion. No one would doubt that they were Jews of the highest order. However, they denied the spiritual realm and also the resurrection of the dead. While most of the Christians we are discussing who wish to deny or ignore the spiritual realm do believe in the resurrection of the dead, hopefully, they are in many ways, like the Sadducees of old. They are pious and devout, and almost certainly genuine believers in the Lord Jesus Christ. However, in spite of their zeal and doctrinal purity, they waltz around the issue of the angelic and demonic realm because it blows them too far out of their comfort zone. It allows the divine and the numinous to shatter the complacency of their daily lives. They have tried to put God in a box. Like the Sadducees, they do err, not knowing the scriptures, nor the power of God, Matthew 22:29. However, Christians in what we call the third world nations on the front lines of the spiritual struggle, find that encounters with spiritual agents of God or the devil as commonplace as a toaster or a microwave is to us. It is all a question of the filter through which we process our data. Such Christians look for the evidence of God's mighty hand in the everyday events of life, and they give Him glory and praise for all the little miracles He does, as well as His big miracles. Christians who see no place for the demonic or angelic are sadly out of touch with biblical, New Testament reality. They have, often without knowing it, assimilated much of the secular mindset of the culture around them. They have bought into Satan's lie, however innocently. Their minds and spirits have been trained to explain away every evidence of a divine invasion into their lives as fortunate coincidence. They are the modern-day Sadducees of scientism. Under every bush. When it comes to the demonic side of the spirit realm, there is always a danger of swinging too far in the other direction. C.S. Lewis. Famous observation in the Screwtape Letters about the two lies which Satan promotes has been cited so often as to be a cliché. Either one denies the existence of Satan altogether, or one places an undue emphasis upon Satan and his servants and develops an unhealthy obsession. We are not promoting the second alternative, by any means. Often people who minister in these difficult areas are accused of seeing demons under every bush. Actually, I can truthfully say that I have never seen a demon under a bush. This is not to say that there are not people out there who are praying for people to be set free from demonic oppression who have allowed themselves to get out of balance. However, this does not mean that we must ignore the spiritual realm or neglect our obligations in the area of spiritual warfare. Obviously, some people have gotten out of balance in regards to praying for those who are sick also. Does that mean that we should stop praying for the sick? Few people would recommend that. However, this kind of problem is just as important as any part of the ministry of the church, and we neglect it at the peril of our flock. Then there are those who attribute everything to the demonic realm. They are casting out demons of hangnails or demons of athlete's foot. Or they blame every sin of the flesh upon demons. This is obviously neither sensible nor biblical. However, we cannot let the abuses of some destroy the effectiveness of those who are really trying to practice biblical prayer and discernment. The point is, however, that people who do choose to ignore this excluded middle will also tend to deny the existence of any sort of menacing Satanism. Obviously, the fact that satanic covens exist and that they do evil things is a threat to their entire worldview. It shakes up their comfortable little vision of the way reality works. Evil with a capital E. This is because the reports of ritual abuse and Satanism document a kind of evil that goes beyond the natural realm. It evidences a kind of preternatural evil which staggers the senses of most sane people. Such evidence means that the devil is indeed alive and well and working daily in the affairs of men and women. This is not a comfortable concept for Christians who are trying to theologize the devil and his demons either out of existence or into some spiritual penalty box until the coming of the tribulation. I remember my own professors in a Catholic seminary teaching us that there was no evil with a capital E. All the evil that existed was social evil, poverty, war, racism, injustice, and human evil. Naked, pure, cosmic evil was too frightening a thought for these liberal, theological types. It may have been partially because such evil necessitated the existence of pure, cosmic deity, a concept of which they were unsure. However, when you begin encountering the kind of evil acts perpetrated upon children, and even adults, which Satanism entails, you can no longer blame it on social evil or neurosis. A Jeffrey Dahmer or Adolf Hitler cannot be explained by bad potty training or a deprived childhood. They can only be explained by a satanic blitzkrieg of transcendental evil, evil beyond any human imagination. However, our culture will not tolerate such a concept, because it is too close to those infamous taboo words, sin and hell. It even upsets the theological apple carts of many Christians who prefer to think of Christianity as an institution where you get saved, join a Bless Me club, then attend multiple how-to seminars and sermons on ways to improve your parenting, your wallet and your self-esteem. They forget that the world's foremost example of self-esteem is Satan. They forget that Christianity should have a prophetic voice in the culture and not simply surrender to the culture's values. It is well and good for Christian preachers to rail against abortion or the homosexual rights movement. However, many of those same preachers have bought into the more subtle and dangerous values of the culture in ways that are far more insidious. They have bought into a secularist, marketing-oriented, media-centered, psychologically based view of the church and its function. This view does not protect them or their flocks when the brimstone-laden winds of Satan begin to wail through their carpeted, air-conditioned sanctuaries and whip their sheep into despair. Thus, we must be careful that our worldview and our expectations are Bible-based. We need to re-examine some of our presuppositions about the way the universe works. Above all else, we need to stop genuflecting before the false gods of secularism and science, falsely so called, 1 Timothy 6:20. With these cultural cautions in mind, it is easier to see why some of these questions are being asked about Satanism. We will try to prayerfully answer those questions.